Yep.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, guys. Well, thank you all for coming today. Sam got the newsletter out last minute. I appreciate that, Sam. Susie's very busy right now, and it just was one of those things where life gets in the way. And I do appreciate the extra effort, Sam. I know what you're going through, and I just do appreciate it very much that you did that. So we'll call the meeting to order right now. And let's do the four-way test. And Mr. Holliday, would you lead us in the four-way test? I can't hear.
You're muted, Mike.
You're muted, Mike.
Mike, you're on mute.
Okay, Rob, as you know, there are no titles in Rotary. The four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Fair talk.
Is it fair?
Fair to all concerned.
Will build goodwill and better
Goodwill and better
friendships.
friendships.
Will be beneficial to all concerned.
Beneficial for all concerned.
Thank you, Dr. Mike.
Hey, Rob. Hey,
Yeah.
Rob. One of the things I loved when I joined Rotary in 1980 is we had 3 generals in the Indialantic Club. And I was an E4. And they were Jim, Harry, and George. And I loved it.
Yeah, it's always awesome to see and hear until you step outside that door and they're back in shape, because I made that mistake before.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. Some of them, not all of them, most of them were incredible, but some of them love that title, which was great. But there are no titles in Rotary, that's for sure. But to me, everybody's a doctor because I'm just a lowly sales guy. So all y'all are smarter than me.
You're not low. You went to Michigan, but you're not low.
Yeah. Oh, ouch. The whole Michigan. How'd that game go? I'm trying to remember. What, with a basketball game?
I think Michigan
Anybody
knocked us. It killed us.
Yeah. I just wondered. I didn't get to see it either. So I got all the reports. Cool, guys. Well, let's see here. Let's welcome our visitors and guests, and we will get to Stewart in a second, who, as Sam already said, will be our speaker. And I'm looking through. Does anybody see? Oh, we have Roger here. Hey, Roger, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine,
Can you
thanks.
say hello and thank you for joining us. Can you say hello, where you're from, and what brought you here?
Yeah, I'm from the Northern Palm Beaches Rotary Club. I've been interested in this club, and I used to be, well, I was in my career, an adult and community educator. So I was kind of interested to see what we have to say today.
Awesome. Well, we're very thankful that you're here. Thank you for taking the time to do that. It's always a little unique when it's online, but we are an online club and we do have international members, but I'm looking to see if we have anybody internationally on today. It doesn't look like it. Who did I miss? Did I miss anybody? I know that Denise reached out to me and said she couldn't join today, so I know she's not going to be on here. Well, thank you again for coming. Did I miss anybody, Sam, that you see, or Mike? Anybody?
No, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, go. Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, with that, I will turn it over to Sam.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is definitely a pleasure. And Kimberly said there's a lot of Alaska folks, but they're not all Alaska, I promise. But I did rack my brain, and all the folks that I've really respected and looked up to over the years, it just so happens have been through my professional career there in Alaska. So I got a good one today. Stewart is going to be our speaker today. In following the vein of you, Rob, Dr. Stewart McDonald.
Yeah, he's a real doctor.
He's a real doctor, yeah. He has roots in Florida, actually. So maybe Stewart, you can tell us a little bit about that. I'm sure there'll be questions about that. But with roots in Florida, Stewart has always been an educator at heart. He first joined the Kodiak Island Borough School District in 1992. And from there, it appears as though he fell in love with Alaska. I'm not sure about that, but it appears that way. He really enjoys the unique challenges there. And we've worked together, on and off over many years in many different positions. And he knew that was just a place that you could find opportunities for change. It was a place that, because of the smallness and some of the small communities he worked in, he was able to really affect change. He was a special education teacher. He was an instructional technologist for 11 years before he transitioned into leadership. Leadership takes many forms. I'm sure he was a leader prior to titles and such. But along the way, after many a mentor, Stewart found himself in more and more conversations where he was the mentor to others, myself included. There's lots of things I could tell you that I've learned from Stewart over the years. From 2003 to 2019, he served in school districts ranging from director to assistant superintendent to superintendent. He was even the Alaska Superintendent of the Year in 2017 and one of 4 finalists of National Superintendent of the Year that would have been honored in Washington, D.C. And that was just a great time to be around Stewart and to see what he was working on. I try to pull a couple of statistics, a couple of fun things that I'm going to toot your horn, Stewart. I know you don't like to do that, but I'm going to toot your horn a little bit. 2016, he had the highest graduation rate for a school district in Alaska. It went from 71% in 2009 to over 90% in 2016 when he was a superintendent there. In 2014 and 2015, he had the highest performing elementary schools. In 2013, 14, and 15, he had the highest English language acquisition program proficiency scores in all of Alaska. He led the state in career technical education, dual credits earned, just the list goes on and on. One of my favorites though, and I'm sure Stewart's going to talk about this, is in 2015 and 2016, they had a repeat. High school students competed globally with students all over the world in college, and his high school kids won, not once, but they repeated. They won twice this global competition. This is NASA level science and engineering. And I know he's very, very proud of that. So with that, Dr. Stewart McDonald, who is, by the way, former Rotarian. So thank you, Stewart, for joining us. Take it away.
Well, thank you. And I'm wearing my Rotarian badge because in Kodiak, if I didn't have it, I got fined. And I have my coin in case anybody asks, so you can't find me for that as well. I came from a group that I think everybody's love language was how far they could press harassing you, and somehow that passed the 4-way test. But always left a lot of money at every meeting. Anyway, I was surprised to hear from Sam. Grateful to have a good conversation with him, and I retired in 2019 from public education and started writing. And I've got a little sleepy, quiet job working with children in trauma at a nonprofit counseling center that I run to stay busy. And I just spend a lot of time writing and working with many of the people that I had the privilege of serving with that accomplished so many amazing things. I've got probably 400 pages of a book on the story that I'm about to tell you that I haven't finished yet. I'm waiting for some of the other contributors to finish some of their parts, but I thought today, I'm going to pull this up real quick. I just start with a story. And let's see if I can find the right spot to do this in. Okay, there it is. So this idea of real world, real-time education is not something that a lot of people connect with. We think of reading, writing, math, scores, basic competencies, but really what is education? And I thought I would just tell a brief story this morning and try and tell it in a way that unfolds well. When I was working with indigenous folks, the Inupiaq call their school the Kadagi. It's a place where you bring the kids to learn all of the skills necessary to sustain your village. And you do it in real time, you do it in the real world, and you practice those skills until you're good enough at them to continue that practice in your contribution to the community to keep that community thriving. And every time I would work in a village, that was the #1 question to be asked. What are you doing in this school system that's going to make our village thrive, make it better? And too often, the answer would be, we're going to teach them something to send them off to college and take them away. And it was a tough question. So we started working on this idea of project-based learning. And I was in a little village in Akiak, south end of Kodiak. They ran their power grid 4 days out of 7, alternating their power grid. And so they spent a lot of time without power, one of the most remote and under developed villages probably in all of Alaska at the time. And the kids there they knew cell towers were coming in and cell phones were coming in. And the community and the kids said, we want technology. We want to be able to be the ones working on those towers. We don't want other people coming from the outside working. So I made some connections with a university in Denver, Colorado, and they had a DARPA project where they were studying space weather. And we had them come down to Akiak because they had so little magnetic interference with their community. They set up space weather antennas to study solar flares and the effects on satellites. And these college students that were master's level college students began working with these kids that were struggling with 6th grade level math. And those kids had to work with them programming Arduino chips, using college level calculus, and using Wolfram Alpha Pro, a software tool to help get the kids up to speed as quickly as possible in a school of about 17 children, kindergarten through 12th grade, in a very small village. And that village tripled in size. People started bringing their young families, babies, toddlers, and preschoolers there. And those kids built the infrastructure of their community. It was a really cool story. Well, I kept pushing this idea. We got plasma cutting tables that are computer controlled, put into the schools and our welding shops. So our boat builders who couldn't afford those tools would come into the schools and teach the students how to build boats. And our students taught the boat builders how to use this equipment that they didn't have the research and development funds in their small businesses to run. And this real-time, real-world education started seeping into everything we did. And along came a very interesting person named Ron Fortunato. He's a teachers in space, educators in space, trained with Krista McAuliffe from the Space Shuttle Challenger. Many of you remember that tragedy of that space shuttle explosion. Ron Fortunato was one of those teachers that would have been picked for that ride, and they continued to do some work, and he dedicated his life to education. We brought him into Kodiak, and he made connections with NASA, a company called IntelliSense, and we started doing some pretty amazing things. But I think this is the best place to start the story. The kids were working on a project, and the project was to work with industry leaders. IntelliSense made sensor platforms. We had a group of kids whose only job was to look at magnetic fields and signals and filter out all of the noise to look for one thing. They were working with a scientist, a crystallologist named Friedman Frund, who studied when crystals in the Earth's crust get under pressure, they send magnetic signals up. And he'd been working for 40 years on earthquake detection and prediction based on these signals. And the kids were just working on this project, not because they were going to solve the mysteries of the world. They were learning how to use sensors, look at the math, look at the data, filter out the noise, isolate something. Kids who weren't interested in math suddenly pouring themselves into math and design. And we get a letter after the kids had been working on this, partnering with other children, other teenagers across the state of Alaska. building these sensor platforms and installing them and collecting the data, the Alaska Seismic Hazards and Safety Commission sent this cease and desist order, sent it to the governor, sent it to the commissioner of education, sent it to all the legislators and school boards and school districts across the state, saying the project was a fraud, had nothing to do with NASA, to stop spending money on it immediately. They commended and congratulated students for their efforts, but then it completely attacked everybody else behind it, claiming that it was all junk science and being led by a charlatan. Well, I just spent a year engaged with these kids. And when you think of the four-way test, examining this letter and then being put on the hot seat, I felt the thing that most educators feel when you put your neck out to do something innovative and cutting edge. You're constantly judged and evaluated on, did you do the right thing? Is this correct? What do you do? And the book that I've been working on starts also with this letter. And what's interesting is the kids were scheduled to go to Como, Italy within 2 weeks of this letter hitting all of our state. And in Como, Italy, the European Space Agency, NASA, and several other groups like CERN, big major research groups were sponsoring a PhD level engineering competition for students that were all working on their PhDs to compete. And our kids entered as high school students. There was no high school division. They just entered their project, filled out the application. They needed a professor and instructor, so we used Ron Fortunato as our professor instructor, and they were accepted on the merit of their work. We were going, we were committed. And now I've got this statewide letter saying it was all crazy, it was bunk. We were fooled. I can't even begin to tell you what that week felt like as I had to answer questions and go through that process. The kids, in fact, were working on a very cutting edge, potentially controversial project of, can you predict by the magnetic signals in the ground an earthquake? And we didn't care about the answer. We wanted them to learn how to read sensors and do the math and explore and just have some fun. And we did. And we had real partners. The partners were NASA Ames Research Center, Dr. Friedman Frund, and NASA Whirlwind, which is a geospatial platform like Google Earth, only for science applications, and a company called IntelliSense, who internationally is known for their sensor platforms. And we pressed on and went. And these kids here, the kid with the white shirt, he, at the end of this project, went on to do some pretty interesting things, but he was in danger of dropping out and failing. The young lady whose back is to us was a very much enjoyed gardening and ballet dancing and hated math, hated science, but she got coerced into the project from a nano agriculture line where she was doing some gardening and she liked that. The kid in the plaid there, he just excelled at math. And the kid who's smiling, looking back at us, is a kid who loved programming. There were actually about 30 students in all contributing to the project, but those students voted for these students to represent them across the state. And the man that's standing there smiling is Ron Fortunato, who is a great partner for this one project. And what you're looking at are the kids in Como, Italy, making their presentation in front of a panel of judges. And they were talking about their design, what they had done, what they had accomplished, and went through this whole project. And there were several earthquakes that happen in Alaska all the time. They collected the data for that. And you'll notice on this slide, there's the baseline of normal noise and activity that their program filter captured. And then you might see at the bottom of that screen a green dot before a bunch of up and down movement, and a red dot when the earthquake happened. And the kids were routinely reporting this kind of event for every earthquake we experienced. And it was being reviewed by NASA scientists and other professionals, and kept repeating this process. And then at the end of the competition, they didn't have any expectations. None of us did. They were called up on stage, and everybody assumed when they were called up on stage, they were just being recognized for being sophomores in high school in this pretty high-end college program. And they were stunned, because as the leaders there in this organization were giving out awards, the kids received the top trophy, their glass bowl trophy, and they took first place in this competition. Not in some special category, straight up won. And we were all stunned. And the Alaska Seismic Hazards Safety Commission, which was invited to come in and look at the data and have conversations with the students, they just insisted that it needed to be defunded. It wasn't a correct project. And that was a painful experience. Well, the CERN scientists came forward and said, okay, these kids had collected a data point per second in their system. And they put a challenge out to them and asked a different group of kids, not the same group, to come back next year with 30 data points per second. And they did. They came back. And oh, by the way, the Europa Challenge created a high school division after these high school students won. But when this group of kids came back, they wouldn't let them join the high school division. They made them compete at the doctorate level again. And when they came back with 60 data points per second and won a second one of these trophies 2 years in a row. It was a pretty big deal. But like public education can be very typical and predictable, we had an undefeated basketball season with a team that took state, and that's what got all the headlines back home, of course. And we couldn't quite get anybody to stand up and recognize the amazing work here. And that's when I really had to assess what happened. How is it over and over again, there are really cutting edge programs going on in education, but we can't sustain them. The young lady in the green is now a medical laboratory scientist. The young man next to her in the long jeans there is studying on a full ride scholarship in Oxford after having initially studied at Stanford. The kid with his hands up the highest, he actually went on to graduate from high school with a college diploma and went right into teaching. He actually teaches at a high school and a college in Barrow, Alaska, at Illisavic College, and he teaches fabrication, welding, and all of the things that he excels at. The kid in the red shirt is studying in an aerospace engineering program at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And many of the other kids all went on to do some pretty amazing things.
Stewart?
Yeah.
Where's that photo taken?
Como, Italy.
Okay.
They're in Como, Italy.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I cannot get my head around. Who were these people that issued this letter, and what purpose? Did you ever find out about that? I mean, I'm really having a hard time understanding why anyone would do that. And did the state of Alaska kowtow to these people, or did they say, piss off?
Well, see, this is the best part of the story. This is when I started working on a research study to understand what these defensive routines are that take apart programs like this. This story has some unique elements, but it's really not that unique. These kinds of programs are happening everywhere, but they barely get their support, and they do not become the norm, even though they're wildly, unmistakably successful. This Alaska Seismic Hazards and Safety Commission, they were the seismologists whose job was to study earthquakes, and a competing idea showed up, and they were worried that they were losing state funding. They were worried money was going to something that wasn't them. And I
Oh my
met with them.
God, how selfish.
Well, I met with them and I talked with them, and I keeping the four-way test in mind, keeping to the truth, taking
God love you. I'm
making
not sure
sure-
I could have.
well, just making sure that they get a fair shake in this. The structures that are built around us today are all about competing, and you got to survive. And they were in a survival mode for funding, and it was a very poorly executed idea. The governor ordered that they never get that this commission is still to this day is not allowed to issue any letters on the governor's letterhead anymore because of this event. And there was fallout. I was looking for unity. I was looking for, how do you take groups like this, these seismologists that could have partnered with the district? How do you get industry and people in the real world, real time work connected with kids in their apprenticeships, their mentorships, and their education, and drive this forward? And
It could have been such a force for good, and they chose to be a force for evil.
the thing is if you look around you, almost everything you read in the headlines, almost every organization you will ever deal with, this is a constant state of the way things are. Teachers felt threatened because non-educators, non-trained educators were pretty much taking the limelight and focus of the education process. Teachers' roles were to teach the academics. The students needed to access the tech, and the tech was being driven by industry leaders. And those groups jump into defensive routines. Good people, meaning well, but funding was on the line. And schools wanted to operate around a school structure, semester and school day. Industry wants to run around the clock and make a project happen. And they were just in collision with each other. And I did a whole doctorate study on how to bridge that gap, deal with those defensive routines, and how do you sustain it. And most of the educators that we worked with have gone on to do other things. They've written their books, and they provide consultation on this work. The reason I wanted to tell the story is it's one of those stories that's movie worthy. And definitely we're going to finish the book, but I have a lot of people that are contributing to it. So I'm waiting for other parts of that to come together. It's a good,
There's a famous guy who lives in Como who might be interested in making a movie about this.
Who's that?
George Clooney.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, the thing is that the story's fun, but the implications, everybody in this meeting right now can have an influence. If we put the focus on getting really great business partnerships that can put together local problems that have to be solved, and put the focus on letting schools be the research and development centers that small business can't afford, and approach school from that point of view, and school budgets from that point of view, and buy those plasma cutting tables, buy that equipment that the school's going to gain anyway for their different programs, but get the things that the community needs to do their business, and then put those people together and have access to students. And really, that's the bottom line. When that happens, magic happens. If that can't happen and people compete and only see the threat of change, then things kind of sputter out. The program, after I retired from Kodiak and left, was closed by the next superintendent. And there were bigger earthquakes that happened in Alaska, and no one paid attention to the equipment that was still running. And scientists from all over the world rushed to Kodiak to get to the equipment and download the data. And the school and the community was kind of surprised by the attention and didn't realize the instruments were still all over Alaska running and collecting that data. And to this day, this open source software is running in, I think, Turkey, and oh goodness, you'd have to get a hold of Ron Fortunato to get the whole list. But this work is actually still going on in parts of the world, but still resisted here in the US because of the fight between magnetic field study in earthquakes versus seismic studies. It's kind of a competing idea, if that makes sense. Let's see here if I've got this. Trying to exit out of this, control the screen. Oh goodness. Is there any way you can exit me out? Oh, no, I've got it. I think I just did. Okay, so that's it. I probably talked way too long, but it was a fun story, a fun project, and the things that I learned about how we can get along and work together, focus on what's true, keep things fair between each other, elevate everybody, and bring good. Before we beat up those seismologists that wrote that letter, I had to examine what environment did they operate in that they felt the need to survive through that letter. That was funding survival in their mind. And that's the thing that I think we can all do a better job and help people realize we've got to work together and not create an environment of competition that brings us all down. Ron Fortunato taught the kids that the new competition is collaboration. And when you collaborate, everybody wins. When you compete, you just create a list of losers.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
amazing. I may have eventually calmed down, but my initial reaction to getting a letter like that would have been hellfire and damnation. You're a lot calmer than I would have been. I mean, they could have reached out to you and said, "Hey, what's going on with this? Can you explain it to me?" But instead, they chose to write this letter that is one of those letters that you can write, but you should never send.
Are you kidding? I thought I was fired.
I can just echo what Stewart is saying, because having been in education for almost 43 years, this happens repeatedly in the public education system, whether it's a letter or a meeting or the school district's equivalent of a fireside chat. This happens all the time. So I wish I could say that it didn't, but it does.
Well, it's happening in state legislatures around the country right now. I don't know what state it is, but someone in a state that has introduced legislation that would fine and jail librarians for checking out books that were considered to be pornographic with no definition of what pornography was. So, really?
I guess, I mean, my thought on that is anytime somebody tries to change the status quo, somebody is threatened. And you know, I'm in internet business. I'm always on the cutting edge of something. And it's that old IBM sale. Nobody gets fired for teaching or keeping the same old stuff. If it doesn't work, well, that's no big deal, because guess what? That's the way we've always done it. It's hard to take a risk on something, but in this day and age, as Stewart has awesomely said, our options and our boundaries, there's no, it's limitless if we could support them a little bit better.
Right.
You know, and that's amazing. And it's an amazing story because to
Yeah, I
have
want to
that
hear
happen,
more.
yeah, to have that happen and to win that award and have basketball take over is, you know, I get it. I've seen it, but wow, that's impressive. And what a great story in a horrible way, but what a great story.
I watched these kids take their little meters that they had, and they identified every magnetic field in the first at the school so that they could filter those out. Then they started finding them in the community. And one day I couldn't find the kids, and I went up to this tall tower over a big, huge theater stage in the town, and they were on the roof. And while we were on the roof, I walked up to see what they were up to, and they were looking at their computer screens and data and counting boats, cars, and airplanes from the sensor data they had, watching them go by. And they were, as the vehicles and things were moving around, they were picking it up on their sensors, and they were identifying them, counting them, and then filtering them out. And
Wow.
I remembered feeling so stupid. So all of my education, and I suddenly felt like I couldn't do math. I had no, whatever I had learned was, I missed something along the way. I learned all about piezo electric crystals that you strike them, they make an electric shock. And if you put electricity into them, they buzz or move or grow. And I made it through all of my education, and those things were around me every day, and I never saw it. And here it was at this high school level, just coming out with such ease. We really have sold ourselves short on our vision and our ability to just work with the kids.
Well,
Absolutely.
it's always the bad stuff that gets the press, and you forget about all these, you know, your kid should have been front page Washington Post above the fold kind of news, and they got OBE'd by basketball.
There's an Italian newspaper in Como that had an article headline that said, "Forget Singapore, we want what Kodiak has." And then they wrote the article was about them winning in 2015. And
Wow.
I've moved since then, and I think it's in a box downstairs, but that was a special trophy for me to keep.
Yeah.
Stuart,
That article needs to go juxtaposed to the letter in your book.
Right.
make a shadow, make a what do you call it? A shadow
Shadow
box,
box.
both of them side by side.
How it started, how it ended up.
A meme, right?
Yeah, exactly.
One of the 4 kids involved in that project came back angry and bitter because he had so many people telling him what happened couldn't have been real, and that the seismic science and the magnetic science wasn't real. And he actually didn't really learn about any of the attack on it until after they came back and won. And he stayed pretty unhappy about it for quite some time. I think over time, he finally realized it was real, and it was a truly respected thing. But the casualties of the fighting that happened in the background had an impact. And the program in Alaska doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, that is so sad.
It exists many other places, both in this country and in other countries in the world. But this one group, even though they did not prevail in their attack, that whole tone and the controversy was enough to make people, educators, afraid to continue to pick up this kind of project.
Wow.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Sam.
I don't know if some of you remember who were living around Cocoa Beach in the 1960s, but for a while, I think it was Cocoa Beach High School. They actually had after hours where kids had keys to the school and certain labs, and they could go back and do, scientific experiments or things like that. So it did exist here in Florida for a while.
Yeah,
Well, can I add to that? I was born in Merritt Island, Florida. My dad and my uncles all worked in the space industry. That was the atmosphere and tone I was raised with, which is why I adopted this quickly and early. And our kids, the students had keys in all of our villages to the schools and came in routinely. We had had the training programs going on. We had both community members and sometimes educators available and supervising. And at the lab that we ended up creating for most of these programs was through NOAA on the island. And we used the NOAA labs for the kids to do this work because it was just, there was pressure inside of the school where teachers were nervous about surrendering classrooms to non-certified educators. And but yeah, that what you described in Cocoa, I grew up with, and that was why I was so freely opening the doors to our kids.
You probably know that Merritt Island has been an IB school for a number of years,
Yes.
as is Mel High now, where my kids went.
Go ahead, Sam. You were trying to say something.
No, I wanted to, I don't want to derail the conversation because we were going a really good direction. And I went out to spend some time with Stewart and his team. And I remember some of those conversations about what are the experts, who are the experts that are in our communities that can come in and that can help us. And I just, I remember fondly thinking about those what ifs that unfortunately a lot of them, never really happened. But the things that did happen in Kodiak were tremendous. I was going to ask Stewart if you had any examples of, we're talking about there's no value judgment and this is more important than this, but could you give us some other examples of some real world context where you brought community and industry together to do something very real in the small villages?
So the space weather project that I opened up with in Akiak was a pretty significant one. But there was a golf course at the Coast Guard base that they couldn't keep grass healthy and growing, and the poppy flower farmers in Alaska, and the kids started a nano agriculture program where they were feeding the enzymes that made rich soil, and they did a whole nano agriculture project with a local farmers in the state and a golf course. And what they discovered, something that I bet everybody in this meeting has grown something, put a seed in the ground and grown. And we all know about fertilizer and water, but I bet none of you really understand how the nutrients get through the root into the plant. And it turns out that the microbes in the soil pre-digest all of that, and they live on the surface of the roots, and their metabolism of pre-digesting that and making the soil a fertile place for these microbes do the nutrient transfer. And so the kids in their nano agriculture project went out and found soil that had oil in it, soil that was bad, acidic, and they did the tests and they fed the microbes, and the microbes brought everything back. And they were growing incredible plants in very harsh conditions in Alaska, and all by feeding the microbes. And we had greenhouses set up and community partners on that. And most people just saw the kids growing things. They were putting in an anode cathode wiring system in the soil wherever they were testing. And then they would get an electric charge from the metabolism of the microbes. And when it reached a certain level, it would set off these little diode, these little LED lights that would flash. And as long as they could keep those lights flashing, they had the right metabolism of the soil, and all the wonderful things happened. And what I learned from that whole project was watching how it didn't matter what it was, it all came down to electricity. Everything had electricity in it. And there are so many of these projects. We eventually then, it became such a big deal that teaching kids how to use the 3D printers and CNC machines that could be the plasma cutting tables. We had a quilting class where the students in the quilting class, they took it as a math class. They had to design the entire thing on a CAD design, program all of the cutting tables to cut their fabric, all the way down to the programming of the quilting machine that would ultimately assemble their quilt. And initially they were real traditional geometric quilts, and then eventually turned into very asymmetric, highly complex designs. And it was all done in math. And you don't have enough time for me to go over all of the ways we applied this thinking.
That's exciting.
And I've seen stuff where they apply it with origami too, and design these big, huge origami pieces, and it's all the math and the understanding the angles and all of this stuff. I watched the Innovation Nation on Saturday morning, a kids show on Saturday morning, because I love all that stuff, and that's where they talk about. They have a series of shows on Saturday morning with all the kids' science shows, and I'm addicted to them, even though I'm not a kid anymore. So,
and the balance was this: there are lots of programs out there that teach projects, and they're good, but when you take the project and turn it into a real problem in a community that a group of professionals are really trying to solve themselves, and then you pair those kids up with that real-time, real-world event that can never be replicated, you never go back and do it again.
right.
That's where we saw the full, complete gain. Just going through a project was okay to develop a skill, but if it didn't have that overall arching purpose,
Right.
it just didn't take off. In Barrow, we replicated this while I was up there in Barrow, and they had erosion problems and would build these tall berm sand walls to keep the ocean from coming in and flooding their villages. And the kids learned to use their commercial licenses with drones, and they had LiDAR sensor arrays up there, and they took over surveying all of the berm walls to make sure that there was no shift in the ground, movement up and down. They could measure it and would bring it back to the city and borough people and give them the full-blown maps. And almost every kid that was involved in that up in Barrow now works for those municipality groups to keep their villages safe, all with technology.
Listen, before you go, consider joining our Rotary Club. You were a Rotarian before, so you could be a Rotarian again.
I will consider it. It just so happens that in order for me to be here now, I have a group of people meeting right in about 6 minutes that I'm going to be late for. So I've got a little bit of a scheduling competition for your meeting time, but I would love to be a part of your group.
Yeah, because boy, I could talk about this stuff all day long. I know everybody else could too.
What's the time?
Oh, it's 8:55. We're 4 hours behind you.
4 hours, yeah.
Well, we appreciate you coming. We appreciate you speaking, and what an incredible topic. And you're welcome anytime. You just pop into the meetings. We'd love to have you.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Standing
Thank you
invitation.
so much.
Thank
Okay,
you, Sam.
guys, then we are going to start rolling on. Stuart, you're welcome to go. You're welcome to stay, whatever you'd like. I understand you got to go, but we're just going to roll through our regular business meeting at the moment here. But thank you again for doing that very
welcome.
much.
All right.
All right, so let's see here. Let me get back to where we need to be real quick because I know we're running out of time here also. Share the screen. All right, everybody see the announcements. A couple things. For those of you that are local, we have a district conference May 13th, 15th at Hutchinson Island Marriott, where it is every year. There's a link there. I thought everybody got an email on it, but if you didn't,
Yeah, we
let me-
did.
Okay, so just making sure that it's always a great event. So if you want to attend, they do have discounted Marriott rates if you want to go. You just log on to there, log on to the DAC-CDB link, and it will take you to where you can pre-register. The other thing too, which is very cool, is Rotary Leadership Institute is impressive, is very impressive. I have not been able to go, and I won't be able to go this time, but the people I know that have been to it have said it fits every other corporate leadership training that they've had. So if you want to go, the first, I think 100 registrants are free. So you have to pay for it. You have to go, you have to complete the course, and then they'll refund you the money. So that's available also. So if that's something that interests you, again, I got it. I don't know. It didn't say to presidents only. It did say that I could share it. So I am. You can scan right now if you'd like. If you just want to see that little barcode on the bottom, you can scan that and go right to the link. If you want more information on it, I will send you the email that they sent me if you don't have any other information on it.
I'm a
So-
discussion leader for RLI, and it's just totally freaking awesome.
That's what
It
I've been
is-
told.
It's such a great day. It's, you learn everything you need to know about Rotary and more. You meet great friends because it's not just people in your district who can come, anybody can come. So any Rotarian can come, and it's well worth the time to
And it's
go.
in person. It's
Yes.
in
Oh,
person.
yeah, so much better. As a matter of fact,
Yeah,
I need to
we-
get in touch with them and see if they need a discussion leader for that, because I'm free that weekend and I could fly down.
Sure. I mean, it's absolutely in person. I mean, you know, the PETS program I had to go through was not in person, and it was hard. This is in person. So it's something worth doing. If you have any interest, take a scan of this now. If you don't, let me know. Or if you do and you want more information later, just go ahead and text me or email me and I will get back to you. Good news is for me, I'm not traveling this week, so I have time to catch up on all this stuff. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew. And we had three sergeant at arms back out, and because it's almost 1 o'clock and I also have a 1 o'clock meeting, we're gonna have to skip the sergeant at arms at the moment unless somebody else wants to pick it up and take it beyond me. But I think we just need to move on today. But again, for the people who weren't here last week, we do have new payment ways for you to pay your fines and your invoices. So all of these, 5 different ways to do it so that you can get the money into the account. So if you have any questions, let me know. I will send you this slide just so that you have it and that you can. We're trying to make it, Kathleen was trying to make it as easy as she could. That kind of took a little bit, that's why it took a little bit longer, as she wanted to test everything, make sure it all worked. Sam was huge in helping us set all this up too, as Sam's huge in everything. So I really, really appreciate that. So if you have, I don't know if anybody in the last minute or two has any questions before I have to jump, I'll be willing to take them. Otherwise, we will close the meeting. Anybody got anything? Or Sam, you want to bring anything up? You want to bring Nepal up?
No, I put it in the chat. If we got a little
Put it
bit
in the
more
chat?
time. Yeah,
Okay.
please share that that Facebook page if you haven't already. Share it with all your friends, and we'll see if we can get a few more sponsors.
All right, guys, cool. Then with that, we'll close the meeting with the Rotary motto.
Service
Service.
above self.
Service
Above
above
self.
self. Great discussion today. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, great speaker, Sam. Great speaker.
Thank you,
today.
Sam.
Thank you.
All right, see you guys next week.
See you
Bye.
next week, guys.
So long.
Hey, Ed.
Yeah,